WCEG Network, where we are the worldwide community empowerment group. We speak life into the community. Log on to WCEGTalkRadio.com. Watch us live on your smart television, on Roku, cable channel, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and now on Facebook, Fanbase, and Blue Sky. Search for WCEG and subscribe to all social media outlets. I am your host for the next hour. My name is Damita Chatman, where we speak life into the community. Download our free WCEG mobile app. Alexa, play WCEG Talk Radio. Listen to WCEG on any 12 podcasts. Last but least, this is this disclaimer. Anything that is said today is the opinions of the host and the guest, not the show producer. Hello, everyone. Today we got a special show. My guest this day is Victor, the former sheriff of Clayton County, Victor Hill. And last week he had put out that he's running for the Congress seat. And so that caught my attention. So I called and asked him, I need to have a show with you. And matter of fact, I might be the first one that's doing the show since he announced being Congress. If not, I'm in the top five. But I want to thank Victor for taking my call. I'm gonna give you a minute to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we going in and I've asked Victor, can I talk about anything and everything? And ain't nothing gonna be on the table. So we just gonna have an up close and personal chat today. Victor
That's how I
Hill.
like it.
Victor Hill.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And like you said, we put it all on the table. Uh, this campaign is about the truth. There's nothing to hide, and I'm glad that we're able to have this frank conversation. For those who don't know me, I am the former sheriff of Clayton County. I think one thing a lot of people don't know about my political history is I'm a former legislator as well. I served in the General Assembly, the Georgia General Assembly, back in the 2003 2004 term. During that term, I was actually successful in authoring and passing four bills into law. Of course, nobody does that alone. It takes a collective measure if anyone knows anything about the legislative process. So this is not anything new to me or something I don't have any experience with. But most of my career, of course, is spent in law enforcement, and most people probably better know me as the sheriff of Clayton County. And with that being said, ask me anything you want.
Okay, thank you, Victor. Let me ask you, what made you wake up one morning and say I want to run for Congress?
Actually, I didn't wake up and say I want to run for Congress. It's kind of like my book, which you see in the background. I never planned on being an author. That was the furthest thing from my mind. It reminds you of when you write a term paper in school, and I wasn't a big fan of that. But when I was placed in prison by my political enemies, and we can go into some of the details of that, I met some very interesting people, and they were very interested in my case. And it was their brainchild, it was their idea to write that book. That's why when you open the first pages of it, I dedicated to them because the book wouldn't have happened if they didn't ask me to write it. And I always say they wrote it. They checked on its progress every day. They contributed to a lot of it. They edited a lot of it. Well, it was also the gentleman that I was locked up with that came up with the idea about me running for Congress. And I think it was born out of this. Everyone that knows my case, that truly knows it, and it's not just looking at the media who we can't depend on for anything, knows that this was a case of lawfare. This was something plotted by some political enemies I had to disqualify me from being in a political process so that they could take that seat. And I was successful in stopping that from happening by supporting someone else, but that's another story. Well, they knew that, and they made me aware that they want you not to be able to run for office, but actually they can't stop you from running for Congress. So that was their idea as well. And a lot of what you read in that book is about my platform because they were of the opinion that I was sent there for a reason, and they said that my reason was to be a voice for them. Well, some people are going to say, okay, well, you're running just for convicted felons or for convicts, and they don't see the big picture. I'm not running just for convicts, I'm running for their wives, their girlfriends, their children, their mothers, their parents. Everybody is affected by this. And as you and I talk, you're going to understand that this one issue alone affects everything. It affects the economy, it affects the safety. Probably the best example I could give you before you ask my next question is this: how does it affect the economy? Well, when I was there, I realized there, and I even realized it at my jail, and I did things about that when I was a sheriff, because that was on a lower level. Nobody saw it, but I did do it. There are a lot of people that simply shouldn't be there. Let me tell you why I say they shouldn't be there. Jail or prison is designed to lock up people from society that are a danger to them. We can't have folks out there raping, robbing, and murdering free, or molesting kids like that, because they're going to continue to do it. But when you start locking up people for nonviolent offenses and giving them 30 years and whatever like that, a lot of people don't understand how much money that costs this country and our tax dollars. And there were a lot of people. There was one guy there who was mentally challenged, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the proper way to refer to it now. I think they used to call it something else when I was growing up. But I asked somebody, "What's he doing here?" And it turns
Mm-hmm.
out he was used as a mule to
Mm.
transport drugs. Well, hell, they were using him as a mule to transport drugs inside the prison, because there's just as much drugs there as there's out there. So a guy that's mentally challenged that people are using because of his mental challenge, I don't think the idea is to put him away for 15 years. It
Mm-hmm.
certainly wasn't stopping the drug problem, because the drug problem is right there. Well, if you look at the amount of people that probably shouldn't be there, we probably could cut that prison budget of 6 billion in half. Imagine what this country could do with $3 billion. So everything, prison is a microcosm of the whole system. And what happens there, even though we may not see it or feel it every day, affects everybody. And if we're able to reform it and change it, it helps everybody, not just them.
Okay, let me ask you a question because you brought it up, and I'm going to ask you that question. Someone said that they couldn't vote for a convicted felon, and I said we got a felon in the White House. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, I do agree with you. And I'm going to say something else that's going to be controversial. You know, I think that when he won, that was an inspiration to a lot of people who were convicted felons, who were told they could never run for office, or told that it couldn't be done. I hope my campaign is a inspiration to them. See, the problem with the criminal justice system is somehow we've made it into a life sentence. And let me tell you what I mean by that. It's interesting. We invite everybody to church, including them, and we tell them that the Lord's going to forgive them all their sins. But when you put a conviction on a man, you tell him he can't vote anymore, he can't be a lawyer, he can't be a doctor. That's a life sentence. You say, okay, we're going to let you out, but there's going to be a life sentence. Once you pay your debt to society, if there was even a debt to pay, because there's a lot of folks that are convicted, me included, that aren't guilty of what they were convicted of, and we'll get into that. But even if you are guilty, what purpose does it serve to take those type of rights from you? Did you know that there are countries where politicians have to go to prisons and debate? The prisons are like precincts because they can vote from prison. And the politicians go there and debate in order to win those guys' votes.
Mm,
You see what I'm saying?
right.
So
Okay.
what we've done is we've taken the system and started giving people life sentences and speak with a forked tongue. The Lord forgives you and I forgive you. Well, really, are we really forgiving these guys? Because we're telling them that there's certain things they can never do again or do the rest of their lives. And even if they're guilty, if they're paid their debt to society, okay, you're guilty. It's like having children, which I don't have any children, but I got nieces and nephews. Okay, once you spank them or once you put them on restriction, you don't tell them they can never play with their PlayStation again. They just can't play with the PlayStation for 30 days. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Tell me, because since you're a former sheriff, tell me the difference between the federal prison and the state prison. What is the difference? I know the federal is the white collar crime, correct?
No, that's not correct. You can go to federal prison for drugs. You can be there for violent crimes as well too. What the difference is, it's kind of like the difference between the state legislature and being a United States congressman. When I was a representative for the state of Georgia, I was responsible for the laws and policies of the state. When I become a congressman, it'll be for the laws and policy of the nation. So basically, a state prison is where you send people who have violated state laws. A federal prison is where you send people who have allegedly violated federal laws.
Okay. 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 Let me ask you. I watched you coming when I first moved when you was over at the sheriff department, and I thought it was you did an excellent job over there. Do you see a difference in the jail system in the crime since you've been gone from Clayton County?
Absolutely. And you read about that in my book. From the moment I was suspended, if you look at that day and then you go a year later, the murder rate went to an all-time high. Uh, and that was outside the jail. Of course, in the jail, they've had 5 murders, numerous stabbings. I know for a fact we got the statistics for that first year, and assaults on officers went up over 100%, and inmate on inmate assaults went up over 200%. So definitely, regardless of whether my critics agreed with my methods or not, they worked and they kept people safe and they kept people alive. And also, the jail was drug free. There was no drugs in the jail when I was there. I actually had a man on my podcast that thanked me for getting him off of drugs. How did I get you off of drugs? He was like, "Well, I couldn't get any drugs in your jail. That was the only jail I couldn't get drugs in." So
Wow.
it can be done. It does work. I ran a tough paramilitary facility and I was tough on crime. I don't apologize for that. And I still am. Just because I'm fighting on this issue doesn't mean that I'm soft on crime now. And most of the guys that I was incarcerated with, and I write about that in the book, they're tough on crime too.
Okay.
They don't want to live anywhere where their houses are being broken into or where they're victims of home invasion robberies and stuff like that. So, and a lot of these guys, some of them were from Atlanta, and their families actually lived in Clayton County, and they were my biggest advocates. They basically told people, "Hey, look, my family lived in this county. They felt safe when he was there. That's not a bad guy. I don't know what it is they're trying to leg, but it's probably some. Well, in their words, they said BS.
Okay. I remember when we became a city in the city of South Fulton, and I sent you an email or text and said, you need to come over here and apply for the job over here because you was running such a, I thought, a great program over there. Uh, I remember you saying anybody that's doing any crime or anything, you don't need to come to Clayton County because we're gonna get you. Did
Absolutely. So go ahead, please.
do you think that they have gotten real relaxed now that
I
Victor
did.
Hill is off the block over there?
There's no doubt in my mind. Let, let me say this, and I was taught by a very good law enforcement leader. His name is Reuben Greenberg. He's deceased now, but he was actually the first African American chief of my hometown in Charleston, South Carolina. And I learned everything I know from him. He actually wrote a book that if you read that book today, even though he wrote that book back in the 80s, it's still light years ahead of the game. And it's called Let's Take Back Our Streets. But what I learned from him is that every city, every county, every jurisdiction has to have something or something that criminals fear or there's chaos. And he used to always tell the story about he used to work in this jurisdiction where there was a 90-year-old woman that used to push this grocery cart through a neighborhood, a bad neighborhood, excuse me, every day.
Mm-hmm.
And no one never robbed her. And he said, "You know why?" And it was like, "No, sir, why?" He said, "Because they knew whose money it was. They knew that if they robbed her, if they hurt her, that it punishment was going to be severe and be swift." And he was of the opinion, he was absolutely right that that's how we have to police in order to keep law and order. And a lot of people think that in the African American community that's not appreciated. Obviously, it is. I was elected overwhelmingly 4 times by predominantly African American population. So we believe in strict law and order like everybody else, even though sometimes the media tries to make it seem like that's not the case. Everybody wants to be safe. Nobody wants their daughter going to the corner store and they got to walk past 5 to 10 thugs or whatever, harassing or or whatever like that. People want to come home and they still got their flat screen TV. People don't want a trap house across the street where they start shooting and accidentally hit somebody's grandchild. So it's very much appreciated and needed in the African American community.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. I know, and I'm not going to call the person name that you're running up against. Do you believe in your heart that you can win District 5 Congress seat?
Absolutely. You know, I really don't know the person. And, I may know of because, of course, I looked up, but I really don't know a lot about that person and don't know a lot about anything that they've done. And so this race has nothing to do with them. When I chose the fifth district, it was for a reason. It's because of the geographically it's in an area where I think I could do the most good. Let me tell you why. It has Clayton, it has a cabin, it has Fulton. Three counties that I've lived and worked in since I've been in Atlanta. Not to mention what I'm running on is a very serious problem, lawfare. And in those jurisdictions, especially two of them, there's a serious problem with lawfare. I'm not the only victim of lawfare. When people think of lawfare, they think it's something that happens against politicians like me or celebrities like the Chrisleys. It's happening every day to everyday people. And I believe that that particular district is experiencing the victimization of that more than any other district. And it's just, I think it's the best place to run. So it really had nothing to do with the individual that has the seat now. I know very little about them, and really don't have to know a lot because that's not the issue I'm running on. Usually when people say I'm not running against a person, to be honest with you, they're lying because they are running against that person. This is the one rare case where I'm really not running against that person. I don't know anything about them, good or bad, but it's an issue that needs to be fought and represented, and I'm the best person to represent that issue.
Okay, let me ask you a question. If it just say if you was to win that seat, how do you feel of working across the aisle with the other folks?
I'm glad you asked that question. When I got elected in 2002 to the Georgia General Assembly, Georgia elected a Republican governor for the first time in 100 years, and the Senate became Republican. So it just happened that when I ran, the Democrats were no longer the majority, the state turned red. So what did I do? I didn't just go and get in a bunch of rhetoric and call the Republicans racist and whatever like that. What I did was figure out, okay, what can I get done? And I work across the aisles to get things done. There are things I couldn't get done, but there are some significant things I was able to get done. One thing that the governor wanted me to work on with him, I couldn't. And that was the very first thing. I said, listen, I can't work with you on that. I can't. I said, but that don't mean we can't work together and we can't get anything done. And then by working across lines, some significant things happen. The bill I'm the most proud of protects kids from being molested. It used to be in Georgia that if you were convicted of child molestation, you could get first offender and still get a job in a daycare. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm fighting for convicted felons to get jobs, but if you convicted of child molestation, we don't want you working around kids. I mean, there's got to be a little bit of common sense here. I'm not softening up on crime. I'm just saying that we need to do a better way of doing business and not misuse the system. So what was happening was people would get that conviction, but no one would see it, and they could get a job at elementary school or something around kids, and then end up reoffending. So by fixing that one thing, I believe we protected untold children from being victimized. So there are some issues that transcends Republican, Democrat, white, black, Jews, Gentiles, whatever you want to call it. And what we got to concentrate on is what can we get done, you know? And, my thing is not so much about, and I'm not criticizing the people that do, but I'm not so much interested in rhetoric and putting on shows as much as saying that I actually accomplished something for the people.
Okay, let me ask you a question because I had this is my thing about celebrity elected officials. How do you feel about elected officials? They tell constituents what they're going to do when they out there running, but once they run, you don't see them no more, hear from them no more until they elected again, and they become I call them celebrity elected officials. How you feel about that? What would you do if you had to be in that case right now? Would you fall in that category, or what would you do?
Of course not. I think my record speaks for itself. You call them celebrities, I call them celebrity wannabes because I'm not sure we got any celebrities right now in Congress, at least not in Georgia. But here's the thing, you know, I was once told something by a great man told me something I'll never forget, and it changed the trajectory of how I led from that moment on and how I campaigned. And this is what he said to me. And this is when I got elected to the House of Representatives. And it was about power. And he said something I'll never forget. And I try to tell as many people this as possible, but I somehow think it goes over their heads. He said the power is not in the hands of the man or woman that drafts legislation. And the power is not in the hands of the man or woman that vetoes legislation or signs it. He said the power is in the hands of the man or woman who casts the ballot,
Hmm.
who decides who's going to draft the legislation and who's going to sign it or veto
Hmm.
it. And when he said that, it changed my trajectory in how my so-called politics, for lack of a better term. If you notice, in the last decade, you rarely saw me at any political events. I was out in the streets,
Yeah.
and and it was whether it was riding a call or going to a murder scene, or whether it was going to sit with a grandmother on her porch and drink some lemonade and eat some sweet potato pie. I was where the power was. If I was at an event, I didn't spend my time up on the stage with the elected officials. I went down into the crowd with the people. And that's why I was elected overwhelmingly 4 times in a row, despite the controversy, despite the media putting out fake stories, despite my political enemies coming up with malicious, untrue prosecutions. And they knew I would have continued to win, which is why they continued to do that. So the power is always with the people. So just like I spent a lot of time, good detectives become good detectives because they're able to talk to people most people won't talk to, the pimps, the prostitutes, the drug dealers. How I saw murders when I was a homicide detective, those were the people I had that told me where the people were. As Golf Brooks would say, friends in low places, right? Well, if you're truly a public servant, spend your time with the people. And I got a track record of doing that. When I decided to run, and I have friends who are elected. I still have friends in high places, and I still obviously I've got enemies in high places too. I'll wait you saw what would have happened. But I haven't called any of them. And I probably, unless it's to say hi, I'm probably not. You know why? I'm not interested in calling. If you notice my campaigns, I never had a bunch of endorsements of elected officials or my celebrity friends. Even though I'm friends with celebrities, I never asked them to endorse me. I want the endorsement of the people, the
Hmm.
church mothers, the cooks, the farmers, the construction workers, the business people, or whatever. Because collectively, the silent majority will decide who will be the congressman of the fifth district. So even though I got friends in high places and I think highly of some and some I don't, being honest, I never made those phone calls. I'm going to see the people. They're the ones that's going to send me to Congress.
Well, basically, what you're saying, and I use this term, and some people get it and some people don't. Basically, you're not getting into bed with anybody because you're not gonna owe nobody anything but your constituents.
I think that's how I ended up in prison. Let me tell you why. Uh, you know, I wasn't in the status quo when I ran. I wasn't picked. Especially let me tell you something about sheriff's offices when you run for sheriff. Usually the way it goes, you're either a part of a family or you're in a clique. You came up through the sheriff's office, you're in a particular clique, and when that sheriff decides to retire or he dies or whatever, then hey, this is the handpicked guy that we're going to get. I wasn't in the sheriff's office. I wasn't born and raised in Clayton County. I'm actually from Charleston, South Carolina. So when I ran, it upset the apple cart because
Mm.
I wasn't the pick, the political group that felt that they ran Clayton County. I wasn't the guy that they picked to be the next sheriff. And some of these people are actually arrogant enough to tell you, well, we'll decide who the next sheriff's gonna be. We already had planned for Clarence to run or whatever, which not picking on him, but that's a true name and a true story, right? And But I wasn't concerned with them. I took my platform to the people, and the people took a chance on me. I told them I was going to clean up the county, and I kept my word to them. That's what I did. So, based on what I learned from what I was told in that saying I gave you, I took my campaign to the people. So it wasn't this particular group or a particular group that goes to a party meeting once a month that made that decision. It was the people of Clayton County, and I went directly to the people of Clayton County. And I'm gonna go directly to the people of the Fifth District.
Let me ask you a question. We have a problem now that we have in Georgia, and I see it more every day now, and it's called the homeless problem. And some of the people is out not out there because they just want to be out there. They have mental problems. What do you say about that? Do you see you trying to help take care of that problem?
I can now from a different aspect. So let me tell you, there's two sides to that story. From a law enforcement side of the story, there's two ways I had to work on this. Number one, there were certain things I just couldn't allow to happen. I closed out all the homeless camps in Clayton County. They're probably back now. Uh, I stopped the homeless from being able to be at the corners and stuff. It's dangerous for the people. It's dangerous for them. Had nothing to do with I don't have compassion for homeless people. It was a safety issue because we've seen things that have happened with that. In those homeless camps, there's drugs, there's weapons. A lot has happened in those camps, so it's not a safe thing to do. What I ultimately was trying to get done in Clayton County, but that's where you needed politicians that control the funds to do, is basically what needs to happen is there needs to be a shelter for homeless people to go to. Is a shelter where folks can go there and not just have a place to stay, but they're there and they're required to do a certain amount of work. They're required to look for a job, and they're there until we can get them on their feet. That way they have a place to go. So if they decide to stay on the street, it's not because they don't have another choice to be there. And then from there, we can have a good idea of who's in the community, what exactly is going on. Now, some folks are not homeless because of finances. Like you said, some are homeless because of mental illness. Well, that was another issue that came up a lot when I was sheriff. The county jails have become our mental institutions. We had a situation one time where a lady kept walking into traffic because she was trying to kill herself and also possibly could have got someone else killed when the cars were trying to avoid her. My deputies tried for 3 hours to get her mental help and couldn't get it. So they didn't know what else to do. So I had to tell them, go ahead and charge her with impeding traffic so we could put her in my medical facility and get her help there. It was the only thing to do. If we let her go, she was going to kill herself or possibly get someone else killed. We need to go back to having mental institutions, which I mean, they're not going to be like jails. They're not going to be like where they're in cells, but there are people that unfortunately have to be kept in certain places because they're a danger to themselves and a danger to others. We just did a podcast on one lady that killed her 6-year-old son, and it's just sad that nobody. There were a lot of signs there that she shouldn't have been there with him to begin with. She had all the windows boarded up. If somebody in government had taken initiative and had the authority to do it and had the places set for stuff like that, she could have been placed somewhere where she could have got help, and perhaps this 6-year-old wouldn't be um, unalive today. So it's going to take money and it's going to take facilities. And unfortunately, because those facilities don't exist, we've turned the county jails into mental institutions. So the only place these people can get help is there. And then sometimes when we are successful in getting them committed, they let them right back out in 2 days. And that's not enough time for someone that's serious about taking their lives or somebody else's lives. I think we all saw the tragedy that happened yesterday when we had a man jump from Spaghetti Junction. And I'm sure if you look at that and get a chance to do what we call a psychological autopsy, there were signs way before this that if something had happened and somebody could have gotten to him and forced him to go get help and be somewhere, then maybe he'd be alive today.
Wow, no, I didn't because I try not to turn on the TV right now. Let me ask
I,
you let me ask you this question. Uh what do you think about the changing some of the laws around the criminal justice system in Georgia? Do you think they need to be changed?
Definitely. Now, as a congressman, I can only effectively change laws on a congressional level. There would be federal laws. Now, that don't mean I can't lobby on a state level, which I can and will. That is make sure we understand. There's state laws and then there's federal laws, and of course, as a U.S. congressman, you're making federal laws. But there's a lot that needs to be changed. Let me tell you the main thing that if we do could really help everybody. Okay. And that's just not my case. And that's not just some of these other cases. Remember, I said something earlier. I said that lawfare is not just something that's done against politicians and celebrities. We think that because that's the only time we really hear about it. Because if something happens to a politician or celebrity and they're on trial, everyone's watching. It happens every day to everyone. And the reason that these type of prosecutions happen is because of what's called a grand jury. And grand juries are archaic, and they're also like a star chamber. Do you know that America is the only country left that still uses grand juries? The
Mm.
the United Kingdom abolished them in the 1930s. Liberia still uses them, but very, very rarely. So let me tell you what the problem is with a grand jury. A grand jury, a prosecutor can walk in there. You can't be there. Your attorney can't be there. You may not even know they're meeting against you. And she or he can tell those jurors anything they want, and you're not there to refute it. And then you get indicted. And that's why you get this saying that you can indict a ham sandwich. The grand jury usually does whatever the prosecutors tell them to do. And when prosecutors go in there, they just don't lie by commission. They lie by omission. They'll lie by commission by just telling stuff that's not true, and then leave out stuff that if these people actually knew, they probably wouldn't indict anybody. Well, now you've got a person caught up in the criminal justice system, and most of them are terrified or don't have the money to fight it or whatever. So it forces them into a plea agreement. And a lot of times, what you see are people are being indicted for charges they would never be charged with because it doesn't even fit the element of the charge, like kind of what happened with me. If you look at what actually happened, if I really did commit a crime, I still shouldn't have been charged with that, especially on a felony level, because nothing that they said actually occurred. So if we just change that process alone, you would probably see a backlog of cases disappear. You wouldn't see this backed up criminal justice system. And so, how do we do that? Well, ultimately, I like to see it abolished, but we got to be honest. And I'm not saying it can't be done, and I'm not going to attempt to do it. That would take a constitutional amendment. But at the very least, we could at least reform how it's done. If a person is getting ready to have something presented against them on a grand jury, they should be notified. They should be there. They should have their attorney there. They should be able to present evidence to show that they're innocent if they are, at the very least. And then also, these grand juries shouldn't be done in secrecy. We should be able to have recorded where if you do catch an attorney lying to the grand jury, they're held accountable. If you lie to a grand jury, you're going to be charged with perjury. Prosecutors are lying to grand juries just to get indictments, and it's almost like giving them a license to lie. Excuse me.
Do you think putting teenagers that I just say haven't killed anyone or did a real serious crime, do you think locking them up helps them or destroy them?
Well, you know, locking a person up, if you truly have a jail or a prison that's designed to rehabilitate, can help if that exists. I can tell you it didn't exist at the prison I was at, and it probably don't exist at a lot of them. I made sure it existed at the jail I ran, and that's why I was ran paramilitary to teach discipline and teach things that would give people a chance to have a chance. So yes and no to that question is how that prison is and how it's being ran. If it's a place like the Clayton County Jail is now, where you got to worry about getting stabbed, it's full of drugs, it's full of contraband. I'm not sure how much rehabilitation anyone can get under that because they're fearful of their lives. If your family got to cash app somebody $500 just to keep you safe, I don't think there's no rehabilitation going on at that point. So
Mm.
one has to do with that. But let me see if I can answer your question more macro than micro. Did you know that most people who are, if they come out of a jail or prison when they're 35, it's rare they ever reoffend again. Now, let me tell you where I'm going with that. Let's talk about the kids that are actually out there killing people and doing violent stuff. They did a study, and I don't know what it is, but it's something about time. You know, a lot of times what they do with these kids is they lock them up forever. And that's not solving the issue either, because if you lock up a person forever, by the time they get to a certain age, really all you're doing is running a convalescence home. And I'll tell you a story about that later. But if we know that there's a particular age, and we know there's a dangerous age between 14 and 25, where you got folks that all they're going to do is rape, rob, and murder, and they have to be kept somewhere in order to keep the public safe. But there is a point in time where, based on their behavior or whatever, which is usually right around 35, that I think society can look at giving some people, depending on what that crime was, a second chance. And you don't really see a lot of reoffending from that point on. So there's something about time and space and maturity that solves that problem when nobody else can solve it. And I've met a lot of people like that, and I soon we'll get to meet a person that it was nearly 30 years ago that I locked him up, and
Mm.
he's just getting out now. And unfortunately, he didn't kill anybody, but it was a violent offense. But the man that I locked up then is not the man you're going to meet now. And I believe if there, I believe that for about 15 years he probably would have been fine. You know what I'm saying? He didn't kill anybody. And when you start killing people, that's a different thing.
Okay.
But that's what I think we need to look at. Do we have the exact answers to that? No. I can tell you right now, locking up people and giving them a life sentence is obviously not the answer. Because if it was, we wouldn't have the crime and violence we have now.
I agree with you. Uh, During the this Congress race that you're going against, and I heard this, and I'm not from Atlanta, so I'm just going by what I heard. That people that had been in office for years and years and years held these seats and lived in our community. They didn't do anything for our community. What they basically did was die in the seat. How you feel
It's
about
true.
that? How you feel about that?
I mean, there's truth to that. And, we all know politicians that have been there forever, and we can't see any results. I'm a result driven person. So any job I get, I'm going to show results. If you look at the 2 years I spent in the Georgia legislature, you see four bills passed into law, and numerous that were co-authored. And of course, I've known people who've been down there at the Georgia General Assembly for over 20 years, and there's not one bill passed into law. So I know exactly what you're talking about. When I was sheriff, we saw a reduction in crime. We saw orderly jail. Anywhere I go, I have a proven record. I'm gonna get you results. You may not like how I get the results, but you're gonna love the results. And like I've always said, even in this race, you may not like where I stand, but you're gonna always know where I stand. And I think that's half the battle, because most of these folks, we don't know where they stand. They tell us one thing and do the exact opposite. I'm not going to sit here. Some people will tell you whatever they think you want to hear just so they can get elected. I'm not going to do that. There's a lot of things I'm going to say that people don't want to hear, but at least they know where I stand, and at least they know what I'm going to do. And what I'm going to do is something that's going to benefit a lot of people, the majority of the people.
Look, you have right now you got this thing, a woman, the women and the men. You're running against a woman. Do you feel confident today that you can go in there and get the votes against that woman, black woman?
Of course, of course. There's this thing out there about women only voting for women. That's not true. They're gonna vote. Now you probably got a few that have this little click, like, okay, well, if it's a woman, I'm gonna vote for it. But I think women more than men realize that we need more men in leadership. I mean, there's a imbalance right now. If you go into certain counties like my county, DeKalb County, the majority of the leadership are women. And that don't mean it's a bad thing. Women are supposed to be in leadership or whatever, but it has to be a balance. And I think too much balance either way is not good. I think it was all men and only one woman, or if it's all women and only one man, that's not a good thing. I think we need a balance. And I said this in my podcast, and I said I think we need more strong masculine energy in the Democratic Party, and I
I
do.
agree. I totally agree with you.
Yeah,
I totally agree with you. When you say you have to have that balance, I see it right now in our city. You got one man and five women, and it's the balance. So I totally agree with you. Let me ask you, what would you do if today, if you had to pass a bill, a serious bill, what bill would you pass today if you was a congressman? What bill would you jump on and pass today?
I'm telling you, if there was a bill to reform the grand jury, that would help everyone. Remember that analogy I gave you with how just cutting the prison population in half, which can be done safely, because most of the people there are just there for financial crimes or whatever like that. They're not a threat to society. We could probably slash that prison budget in half, which is a $6 billion budget. That's $3 billion. And for people who understand the significance of that, if you sleep for 1 billion seconds, you'll sleep 32 years. If you lay $1 billion in the end, it will circle the earth 4 times. So that's significant. That could go towards things like the homeless, like you and I were talking about, mental health, and things like that. That's very significant. But also, what's destroying our community is how we just throw people in and out of the legal system like cattle, just so people can get stats, or like in my case, people can do lawfare. Well, we don't want him in the political process, so we're going to make him a convicted felon so he can't run. The criminal justice system is being used to disqualify people, and that doesn't just hurt them; it hurts businesses as well too. There's businesses that want to hire certain people and can't because of this. And when you look at why these people are convicted felons or what they're convicted felons for, it's not like they're serial killers or anything. They're capable of working. So the ones who want to work and want to do right, we should be able to give them that ability. Now, if you just want to go out there and you want to continue to sell drugs, you want to continue to do stuff like that, then oh well, so be it. And time to go back. But to eliminate a group of people is not right, especially if they're trying to do something different with their lives. Isn't it sad that the only position you can run for as a convicted felon is Congress? So think of the leadership that we could probably have on a state level and local level. And usually, let me tell you, politicians on that level are probably just like the ones in Clayton County. If they think they can't beat you and they're scared of you or whatever, hey, we got to find a way to stop this guy. And then they'll do
Mm.
things like you saw them do with me.
So you just brought up a point that I was going to ask you next about you running for Congress, because the word, the street, as I say, the street committee, they was like, he can't run because he's a felony. So you just answered that question. The A felon can run for Congress.
Yeah, we just saw it on a national level. And it was something I think, it's something I think people want to see. Let me tell you this. Like I said, you may not like where I stand, but you'll always know where I stand. And here's what people are going to argue against this. They're gonna not like it, but that's life. I'm gonna speak the truth. When you use the criminal justice system to convict a person because you think they can win, that's wrong. I don't care who they are. I don't care who they are. That's wrong. If you don't like a person, you don't vote for them. But you don't indict them and try and send them to prison or try to disqualify them with a criminal conviction. And that's what we saw go on, not just on a national level with that race, but we see it going. We've seen it here. We saw it with Burl Ellis in DeKalb County. And the sad part about it is a lot of this goes on in our own party. That's why a lot of folks thought I was going to run Republican. I talked about this when I made my announcement. A lot of people, you run Republican or Democrat. And the reason I think they thought I was going to leave the Democratic Party is was a Democratic DA that took this case to the feds. It was a Democratic appointed judge that not only rigged the trial, but coerced the jury to a guilty verdict after they were out there for 4 days. It was Democrats involved. It was a Democratic person that got colluded with the DA to write a letter that I didn't write
Hmm.
to see if they could use it. So they figured, well, why would you want to continue to be with that party? And what
Wow.
I said was this: I look at it like I look at some family members in my actual family. I got some wayward cousins. I got they're damn near gangsters, to be honest with you. And I had to run two of them out of my county. One I put on a Greyhound bus and sent them back to South Carolina. And the other one I ran them back to DeKalb County. They're still my family. I still love them. I want them to do right. Well, right now there's problems in the Democratic Party. We gotta be honest about that. It's
Absolutely.
weak, it's functional. Most of the cities that's ran by Democrats, the crime is high. You know, and so instead of just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because we're talking about Democratic leaders, we're not talking about people who vote Democrat. People who vote Democrat don't agree with this stuff either. But instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, let me bring what we need. And and I don't back down from it. We do need more strong masculine energy. We do need to be tough on crime, but we also need to be common sense tough on crime. We don't need to be just convicting people because we don't want them to run for office. We don't need to be convicting people just because we want to get the stats up. And we don't need to be passing silly laws and letting them continue to exist that eliminate these people from moving on with their lives and accomplishing great things. If you could have seen, if they joke about jailhouse lawyers, but some of the most brilliant legal minds I've ever come across while I was there and before I was there were these so-called jailhouse lawyers. If I could have had them, I would have won the trial probably, even with all the cheating the judge did.
Mm. Let me. I was going to ask you this. Going down to that federal prison, and I know you probably saw a lot. And I remember watching you the day that you got on that plane,
Yeah,
and they made a big old thing about that. How many months or years you didn't spend that long down at the federal prison, did you?
10 months exactly. I was there 10 months.
In those 10 months that were you down there, were you able to be a help or hinder to the people?
Well, I would like to say a help, but they were more a help than me. A whole book has been published because of them. A congressional run came out of their brainchild, collective brainchild there. I think, and I say that in the book, I thought that it was going to be my monastery. I was just going to sit down and meditate and work out or whatever. And then it ended up becoming my university. So I have to say that they were more help to me than I was to them. I think the people who sent me there, worst, that's one of the 10 top worst prisons in the federal system they sent me to. No doubt it was done by design. If you read the book, I was put in the most violent housing unit. And I think they were expecting these guys to shank me or whatever, but the exact opposite happened. Like I said, some of them already knew of me. Some of them had family that lived in my county that said, "Hey, that guy was great to us," or whatever. So they didn't just become my protectors; they became my professors. And that book was their brainchild. This race for Congress was their brainchild. So I think they helped me. Now there was some things that happened. Like there was one guy there. You know, I want to say this, and I write about this in a book. This race isn't just about people who are wrongfully convicted. We get on this thing about, okay, wrongfully convicted people, which I'm one of. But we got to help the rightfully convicted people. There were people at that prison who they knew that they did wrong. They're not saying they shouldn't have been prosecuted. They're not even saying they shouldn't have gone to prison. What they're saying is they were overcharged, they were over sentenced. The things that was done in order to get them indicted wasn't right. And they're absolutely right about stuff like that. There was one guy there, and we know absolutely this shouldn't have happened. He received an inappropriate video, and he knows he shouldn't receive, and he admits to that. But he was given 30 years. The person that made the video and sent it to him was only given 5 years.
Mm.
And and when he tried to appeal it, deaf ears. And he was actually going to kill himself. And I would say if I did anything while I was there that was worth anything, it was that was talking him out of killing himself. But I think I was more the recipient than I was the giver.
Mm. Wow. I know when I first met you, you was at a church that I attended, and you walked in there, and I mean you walked in there. You basically own that aisle coming down that aisle. And I said the shortest man, and he got that much respect. Let me ask you, and I'm going to bring this name up. And usually I don't bring it up, but I'm going to bring this name up.
Okay.
Did you talk to Mr. Elgin Bell about running for Congress?
No, I did not. No, I did not. I have not seen him in a while. I think it's no secret. I was once his driver and I was once his bodyguard.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was during the time that he was running to be the chairman, actually, of Fulton County. A lot of people think I was with APD. Somehow I got out there, I was with APD, and I was his driver and bodyguard then, and that I was a member of the Red Dogs. But that's really not true. All my time was spent in Atlanta in law enforcement with Clayton County. But I have not seen or spoken to him since I have returned.
Okay.
And it's not for any bad reason or anything like that. He and I, of course, have had our disagreements. That's no secret. But we were able to overcome that. And he was someone that I learned a lot from. And I still have a lot of respect for.
Okay. It's a question that I'm sorry, Senator Warnock, they said Warlock, but he used the term prison industrial complex. Could you kind of hit on that a little bit?
I'm not sure. I haven't heard what he said. And the only thing I can think of is that's a fancy way of saying prison pipeline, perhaps. And
Okay.
I'm not aware of what he said, or I didn't hear that, but hopefully that's what he's talking about. That it's turned into like an industrial factory or something where we're just producing felons, and most of the time is unnecessary. And that has a lot to do with the grant. Let me tell you something. There's a lot to be fixed in the criminal justice system. Over sentencing, um, overcharging, the conditions of the prison. But let me tell you this, it's always a catalyst to everything. I'm a big fan of Chinese medicine. And the one thing I learned from them is this. Instead of fixing the symptom, let's find out what's the root of the problem.
Mhm.
And and sometimes whatever you think the root of the problem is, you just never believe. I remember one time I had bad indigestion, I couldn't figure it out. And they just did what they do, and they said, okay, quit eating eggs and you'll be fine. And even though I was disappointed, it was right. I stopped eating eggs, and that was the end of it. Well, we can't replace all of these corrupt district attorneys. And I'm not saying every district attorney is corrupt, but we got them. We got them here in Georgia, and we know two of them. So, you can't wait till an election because they can do a whole lot of damage between that. If we fix that one grand jury process, we could deal with this the way I used to deal with drug dealers. You never really heard about me locking up drug dealers, even though people said I was tough on drugs. And let me tell you why. Because I knew locking up one kingpin was not going to solve anything. It was just another kingpin was going to take his place. He's going to probably be happy. I'm glad you locked him up, so now I can take over. What I did was stop their ability to sell drugs. So, and it was very simple. I mean, if you got a trap house, I just put a car in front of your house, you can't sell drugs. So they either had to stop or they had to move. Now, they may not have been happy about it, but at least they didn't get a 20, 30-year sentence, and everybody's happy. No more, the grandmother's happy, everyone's happy, and I stopped the problem. Well, that's what we got to do with these prosecutors. The main reason that they're able to do the things they're able to do is grand juries. If we're able to reform that grand jury, we might not have to worry about over sentencing and overcharging, because that's the mechanism they're using to do that, to convict so many people. We're the only country that has a grand jury. Every place else has abolished it. That should say something. But we got to get to the root of the problem.
Do you think that, and you talked about the DA's office and etc. Do you think that politicians kind of mix that with the justice system, where to get cases where they want done during the election year, or to get the folks votes?
Absolutely. We've seen it on a national level. We've seen it here locally, not just with me. We've seen it in DeKalb County. Not only did they indict the CEO, they killed the man that won the sheriff's race. But we're seeing this most so done with the criminal justice system. We're not seeing assassinations like we do, but the criminal justice system is a way to assassinate a person. It's almost like a living death. You put an indictment, a felony conviction on a person, you lock them away, and now you don't have to worry. You've eliminated your competition, so your friend or you can get the particular seat. And we have DAs like that. We had one in the cab that did it with Bro Ellis. We see it in Fulton, we see it in Clayton, and it's a serious
Wow.
problem. And what we got to understand is this: if they would do it to officials, celebrities, what do you think is happening to the guy we don't hear about? Exactly. This is bigger than, hey, we got to protect people right to run for Congress or run for president. Everybody told us when we were kids, hey, you can be anything you want. You can run for president if you want. They didn't tell us people would indict us if we decided we wanted to be president. Like I said, if you don't like a person, that's your right. You don't vote for them, and that's how you say your dislike for them. You don't indict people and send them to prison because you don't agree with their political ideology. And we have a lot of prosecutors that feel that way and misuse that office. Not all. We're not going to throw every prosecutor. Honestly, let me just say this. Every prosecutor is not corrupt. Every judge is not corrupt. We're not going to say that. But the judge in my case was, and the prosecutors in my case were. And that's how that book came to be, and it points it all out. We know we can prove the prosecutors lied to the grand jury, and we can prove the judge was friends with my political opponent. And those are the type of people that we need to be dealt with. It's not quite that simple. We can't wait every 4 years. The best thing to do is to put things in place so that they can't manipulate the system with grand juries the way they do. They can't manipulate the trials the way they've been doing. That's the best way to fix it. And the best way always is to start from the top down, which is why it's a blessing that I can actually run for Congress as opposed to just running on a state level.
Do you think our black I'm just going to speak for here in Georgia. Do you think our black communities have suffered under an all black administrations?
You know what's sad to say? Let me tell you, I don't know if you ever heard Amos, I forgot his name, and maybe as I'm just having a moment, but he was the first black sheriff since Reconstruction. And there's a book about him that a friend gave me. He was elected in Macon County in Alabama in 1965. Imagine that. And it almost reminds me of Clayton County in a way because there was this major demographic change that allowed him to get elected sheriff. Well, when you read that book, he says something very interesting. I think his name was Amos Emerson, I believe, but don't quote me on that. But he said something I'll never forget. He said there was this one guy that said, hey, we can't have all black leaders. He was black. He said, the money's going to leave. This is going to happen. We still got to maintain such and such and such. And he said, basically, they just called him Uncle Tom and told him, hey, whatever. Well, then by the time you read the end of the book, he talked about how there were hardly any businesses left in that county, how the money dried up, the infighting, and how basically everyone turned on each other. And he said, you know what? I guess that man knew what he was talking about. It's an interesting read.
Mm.
It was the first black sheriff since Reconstruction. Well, if you look at Clayton County, it kind of reminded me like history is repeating itself. We had a major demographic change, and as a result, um, all of the leaders in Clayton County at this time are African American, except maybe one or two,
Okay.
maybe one, right?
Okay. Look,
And go ahead.
we go. What we gonna do? We might have to get you back again, but we
Sure.
down to the last minute. I want you to give me your closing. What you want folks to look for you, and we gonna get you back in. Matter of fact, I'm going to be doing some town halls, and we're gonna talk about that on another day. Give me your closing statement.
My closing statement is this: I'm Victor Hill, and I have been bestowed this convicted felon status for political reasons. There's a documentary coming on about it, and you'll see that that case was a farce, and you'll see the connections between the judge and everybody else. But remember, this race is not just about convicted felons. If you're married to a convicted felon, if you're related to a convicted felon, if you're a friend of a convicted felon, if you've ever employed a convicted felon or want to employ a convicted felon, I'm the man for the job because this what we're about to do is going to affect every facet of society. It affects everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a convicted felon and you can't vote. You have family members that can vote. Get them on board. You can still give to a campaign. Don't let society put you out of a process because of that. This needs to be changed. There are foreign countries where convicted felons can vote, and politicians have to come there in order to seek their votes. You should not be out of the political process. Anything you can run for it. And any way you can support, let's support it. This is for everybody. This is about fixing. Because if you're not convicted, you could be a victim like me. Anyone can get convicted if put in a certain circumstance where you got a prosecutor that's willing to put a conviction on you, be it for political reasons or personal.
Thank you. Put your book in the chat, Victor, for us. People who want your book, tell us how. Write it in the chat for. Again, I want to thank you for coming today.
Sure.
This was short notice because we were out for the summer, but you took the call. We look forward to having you at the town halls. Keep us just keep watch. I want to thank the viewers for tuning in today with Damita Chatman. I'm your host, and Victor Hill. And I'm not endorsing Victor Hill. So let's make that clear so people won't say, oh, she's endorsing. I wanted to hear from Victor Hill, the person Victor Hill, and then people can form their own opinions. When the race comes, you make that decision. I want to thank Victor Hill for coming. You guys have a great summer. Be safe. And Victor, we'll